I wanted to talk a little bit about the programming models that we support. Again, when you use them in the hands-on session this afternoon, they'll become clearer, but these are quite traditional programming models that are used in a large class of applications. One model that's obvious in this space is the master worker model, or the bag of tasks model, and the idea here is very simple. We have a master task or tasks that generate work, right? And we should look at master and worker as a role rather than a specific node. So there could be a node that would have a role of a master and that of a worker, right? Then the job here of the master is the master role is to generate tasks which then get consumed by workers which are responsible for executing those tasks. And the tasks have different colors. For example, they may be colored based on how much computation they need, or specific resources types that they need, or certain budgets they have, or certain constraints they might have in the sense that they can run within certain boundaries. There may be sensitive data that they run on, and they may not be able to run on resources outside certain firewall boundaries. So there may be very different types of tasks. And any task generated is colored based on what its constraints and requirements are. We have different classes of workers, and they are based on their capabilities, but broadly we have divided them into two. And these are based on the type of applications that we work on. Secure workers are workers that have additional capabilities and that are able to host data, are able to be more reliable and robust, that we can depend on them to a larger extent, right? And so these are workers that we can use to offload some of the administrative tasks, as well as to maintain scalability, or to be able to maintain data locality and things like, and other such aspects. The unsecured workers are workers that we can make absolutely no assumptions about. They may fail, they may not have required constraints in terms of security, or they may be workers on public clouds or other such resources. And so these workers, we only allow them to get appropriate tasks that are colored, that they can go to such workers and execute them and return the results. And we don't expect any guarantees in terms of the work associated or assigned to us. Unsecured workers would definitely come back. Okay. Then there's a proxy, which is the interface for these unsecured workers, through which they come into the system and advertise what capabilities they provide and request jobs or tasks, and the proxy then is able to provide them with certain tasks which they can then go ahead and execute. And the autonomics capability here tries to configure resources, the number of masters, the number of workers, and the overall infrastructure, so that you get the type of behaviors that you're looking for. Another model that we have implemented on top of this framework is the MapReduce model that's very popular, and you learned a lot about this, I believe, yesterday. So we have an implementation of this on top of CometCloud that allows us to layer this on top of a federated infrastructure. And the other thing that we've been trying to do, because of the nature of CometCloud, is to try to use in-memory operations as far as possible. The motivation for doing this was a class of applications we were looking at, which were trying to do this kind of MapReduce type of analytics on a large number of relatively small and medium files, right? So you had a lot of heterogeneity, and you had a lot of small files that you wanted to process in here. And so a lot of the optimizations that we have done in the infrastructure and the autonomic management system is try to optimize for this kind of workloads. But basically, the API is very similar to the Hadoop programming system for MapReduce, and what it does is then allows you to run your tasks, your map and reduce tasks on nodes on this federated infrastructure that might include different type of grids, clouds, and as well as public cloud type resources. And the autonomics again allow you to configure the right mix of resources that you need to meet the constraints of your application. Now, this will again be covered in one of the hands-on session later this afternoon. Finally, we do support standard workflows where you have a bunch of tasks, and they might be belonging to the previous two programming models. So you might have a bag of tasks stage coupled with a MapReduce stage coupled with another type of application stage, and these can continue, and these stages are coordinated. They might have a purely data dependency where one says that when one task is completed, I start the other one. They could be coupled where they're running simultaneously, right? And CometCloud looks at provides support for executing these programming models in terms of staging them and running them on appropriate resources, but also then provisioning resources to meet the requirements of a certain stage. For example, there might be a very data intensive stage that has to run on a machine with a certain characteristics in terms of memory capacity and the like. And then if that is not part of the federation, that would be federated, assuming the right credentials exist, and then the task would then be run on that resource, right? So it provides the ability to do this kind of execution of these workflows. This shows very summarizes what I've been talking about, and also shows one of the experiments we did as part of the one of the applications that been working on in the enterprise space. And this was a workflow which was doing which was really a business intelligence workflow based on a lot of document processing, and it allowed us to integrate these different type of applications stages. One was a bag of tasks stage, which was doing a lot of document processing of document images and trying to interpret them. And the second one was then taking a lot of that data and then doing some analytics on it, right? And so these were then in this specific experiment that we did, we used Amazon for a lot of the analytics, and we were using FutureGrid resources for the bag of task models, right? But really what this is showing is that we can run these workflows on any sort of federation and be able to map the tasks on the appropriate set of resources.